The galaxy had never seen a gathering like this before. For countless cycles, countless species had traveled across the vast stretches of space to meet at a single point, to discuss matters that would affect millions of worlds. The Interstellar Summit was not a place for casual conversation. It was a place where empires weighed their power, where trade agreements could decide the rise or fall of civilizations, and where diplomacy was not just a skill, it was a weapon. Yet among all the powerful, proud, and ancient species present, one species drew a quiet, almost unspoken attention: humanity. Humans had always been underestimated. On the surface, they did not have the largest fleets, the deadliest weapons, or the oldest traditions in the galaxy. But what humans had, others could sense immediately, was something more subtle: a determination, a curiosity, and an unpredictable way of thinking that refused to bend under pressure. Many delegates had prepared for months, some even years, to face what they thought was the predictable nature of humanity. And yet, as the human delegation entered the gleaming hall of the summit, they were met with eyes that studied every step, every gesture. With cautious fascination, the room was immense, far larger than any single planet's council chamber, with walls that shimmered like the surface of a calm star, and seats arranged in a circular pattern that emphasized equality, or at least the illusion of it. Ships from distant galaxies could be seen through transparent sections of the ceiling, drifting silently in orbit, a reminder of the power that each representative carried. The atmosphere was thick with tension and expectation. For most of the species, the Interstellar Summit was the moment to make statements, to assert dominance, and to show the galaxy who was truly in charge. Humans, however, seemed unconcerned with these traditional displays. They walked steadily, quietly, observing, listening, and taking in every subtle interaction without rush or agitation. From the very first moment, it was clear that humanity operated on a different wavelength. While other species engaged in elaborate greetings, with displays of light, pheromones, or telepathic signals designed to impress, the humans offered simple gestures: a nod, a hand extended in greeting, a soft voice. Nothing spectacular, nothing intimidating. And yet there was something about their calm confidence that caused even the most experienced diplomats to pause. They had expected theatrics, and instead they found clarity and focus. The initial sessions began with formal introductions and ceremonial speeches. Many species took this opportunity to boast of their history, their conquests, and their technological achievements. They recounted centuries of victories, of worlds absorbed into their influence, and of knowledge accumulated over millennia. Humans listened without interruption. Their expressions were neutral, sometimes even faintly amused, but never dismissive. When it was their turn to speak, they spoke briefly and with precision. Their words were simple, clear, and free of exaggeration. They did not boast, they did not threaten, and they did not indulge in the elaborate rhetoric that others seemed to value so highly. Yet, for reasons no one could articulate, their words carried weight. Whispers began to circulate almost immediately. "Why do they speak so little?" one delegate asked. "Why are they not participating in the grand debates?" Another wondered. A few even speculated in private that humans had something hidden, some secret power or knowledge that they were carefully guarding. After all, in a galaxy where transparency and display of strength were often seen as essential, the human approach was a puzzle. It was a kind of silent assertion that confused as much as it impressed. As the first day unfolded, it became clear that humanity was not here to play by the usual rules. Other species moved pieces on the galactic chessboard with aggressive intent, forming alliances, offering conditional support, and attempting to outmaneuver one another with intricate diplomacy. Humans, in contrast, took notes, asked measured questions, and maintained a demeanor of quiet observation. They did not interrupt the flow of debate, nor did they feel the need to draw attention to themselves. This calm, deliberate strategy unsettled many. Some saw it as arrogance. Others saw it as brilliance. But all agreed that humans were unlike any other species they had ever encountered in their long histories. By the second day, the subtle power of humanity became even more evident. While other delegates were caught up in heated arguments and attempts to dominate the discussion, humans approached the issues differently. They asked questions that were simple but profound, questions that cut through layers of complex rhetoric and exposed the core of each argument. They highlighted inconsistencies, pointed out overlooked consequences, and demonstrated a level of reasoning that others had not anticipated. It was not aggression. It was clarity, and it had a magnetic effect. Those who had been confident in their strategies found themselves reconsidering their positions. Ideas that had seemed sound suddenly appeared weak under the scrutiny of human logic. Outside the council chambers, in the quiet corridors and observation decks, observers began to take note of the human delegation's behavior. Teams of scientists, diplomats, and even military strategists from various species analyzed every movement, every conversation, and every decision made by the humans. Some of these observers were convinced that humanity had a hidden agenda, that they were here to manipulate the galaxy in ways no one could yet see. Others believed that humans were simply different, operating on a level of thought that transcended traditional notions of power and influence. The truth, as always with humans, was something in between. They were focused, independent, and unwilling to conform to expectations simply for the sake of appearances. As evening fell on the third day of the summit, the humans gathered in a private chamber. They did not boast about their performance or discuss what others thought of them. They focused on understanding, planning, and observing. Their strategy was not about immediate victories or public displays of dominance. It was about seeing the bigger picture, understanding the subtle currents of galactic politics, and preparing for a future on their own terms. They were not naive. They knew that the galaxy was watching, and that every gesture, every decision, would be interpreted in countless ways. But they were deliberate, patient, and confident that their choices would speak louder than words. By the time the first week of the summit drew to a close, it was clear to everyone present that humanity's presence had already changed the dynamics of the gathering. The other species, accustomed to relying on spectacle, intimidation, and tradition, now faced a challenge they had not anticipated. Humans had not acted aggressively, nor had they tried to dominate the conversation. Yet, through calm observation, precise questioning, and unwavering focus, they had shifted the attention of the room. Diplomats and leaders alike felt a strange mix of admiration, unease, and respect. The humans were neither allies nor adversaries at this point. They were something new entirely, a force that could not be ignored. And that could not be predicted. As the delegates prepared for the next phase of discussions, the humans retreated briefly to their own quarters. They spoke quietly among themselves, not of triumph or strategy, but of understanding. They were observing not just the arguments being made, but the intentions behind them, the fears, the ambitions, and the compromises that shaped each species' approach. They knew that the galaxy was watching them, yet they remained centered on their own perspective, refusing to be drawn into the performative politics that dominated the hall. By the end of this first part of the summit, a single truth had become undeniable. Humanity was different. They had not yet acted decisively, but their calm presence, their patience, and their focus had already caused waves of speculation, tension, and quiet admiration. The galaxy had begun to take notice, and those who underestimated humans would soon learn that their silence was not weakness, but the first sign of a strategy that would unfold in ways no one could yet predict, even as the lights of the summit dimmed for the night, and ships slowly left orbit to return to distant systems. One thought lingered in the minds of all who had observed humanity. Whatever humans were planning, it was deliberate, it was measured, and it was nothing like anything the galaxy had ever seen before. The true impact of their presence had only just begun, and already the galaxy watched in a mix of curiosity, admiration, and unspoken dread. The days following the initial meetings at the Interstellar Summit were tense, filled with an almost electric curiosity that spread across the galaxy. Every species in attendance had begun to notice that humans did not behave like the rest. While others hurried to secure alliances, broadcast their influence, or showcase advanced technologies, the humans moved deliberately, observing and calculating. They did not make loud proclamations or attempt to dominate discussions, but their silence carried a weight that others could not ignore. Observers started paying closer attention to the human delegation. Even minor gestures were noted, analyzed, and sometimes misinterpreted. A simple pause before answering a question was seen as hesitation by some, while others read it as deep thought. A quiet nod in response to a point made by another species became a topic of speculation. Was it agreement, recognition, or subtle defiance? Every detail mattered because, unlike other species that wore their intentions openly, humans were precise yet enigmatic. The humans themselves were aware of the attention but did not seem concerned. They spoke only when necessary, and even then, their words were deliberate, clear, and to the point. One by one, delegates from other species tried to engage them directly, hoping to provoke a reaction or uncover a weakness. Some asked technical questions about trade, technology, or military strength, expecting humans to boast or overcommit. Others attempted indirect tactics, like praising one idea and criticizing another, to gauge how humans would respond. In every case, humans remained calm, measured, and polite, revealing only what was required and nothing more. This behavior made other species uneasy. In a galaxy where power and influence were often demonstrated through visibility and bold action, humanity's restraint was almost threatening. They did not behave like rivals, yet they refused to follow the expected rules of engagement. Their silence was not ignorance, nor was it passivity. It was a choice, a clear, unspoken assertion that they would act on their own terms, and no one else's. Behind closed doors, some species began to worry. They called secret meetings to discuss the humans, analyzing every decision, every gesture, and every word they had spoken. There was talk of hidden strategies, of undisclosed technologies, of potential alliances that humans might be forming outside the council. The truth, however, was simpler than anyone guessed. Humans were not plotting in secrecy. They were observing, learning, and forming their own understanding of the galaxy and its complex web of relationships. Their strategy was patience and awareness, qualities that the galaxy often overlooked, but that could become incredibly powerful in time. Humans spent their days moving quietly among delegates, asking questions, listening to debates, and seeking to understand the perspectives of others. When someone presented a bold idea or a controversial proposal, humans would inquire not about the spectacle, but about the reasoning behind it. Why do you think this is necessary? They might ask. Or, what do you hope to achieve? These questions seemed simple, even naive to some species, but they struck at the heart of every argument. Others could not answer clearly. Humans did not judge, but their curiosity exposed weaknesses in logic, inconsistencies in plans, and assumptions that had never been questioned. Even species with centuries of experience in diplomacy found themselves reconsidering their positions. A veteran ambassador from one of the oldest civilizations admitted, privately, that humans had a way of cutting through the noise. They did not try to dominate, manipulate, or intimidate. They simply observed and asked questions that forced others to think deeply. It was not aggressive. It was precise. It was effective. Meanwhile, humans also began to notice patterns of their own. They saw which species relied on intimidation, which depended on flattery, and which used alliances as shields to mask insecurity. They recognized that many debates were not about truth or fairness, but about ego, influence, and fear. Humans did not mock or challenge directly. Instead, they adapted, listening carefully, speaking sparingly, and maintaining their focus on understanding. Some delegates started to feel frustration. They had expected to face a predictable species, one they could influence or manipulate. They had counted on human participation in the games of diplomacy, expecting them to reveal intentions or pledge support. Instead, humans remained quiet at key moments, declining to intervene or commit to any position. This absence of expected reaction caused unease. In diplomacy, unpredictability is dangerous, and humans were proving to be completely unpredictable without being reckless. Rumors began to spread. Some claimed humans were planning to form a hidden alliance with a distant civilization, one not attending the summit. Others speculated that humans had technology far beyond what was known publicly. Delegates whispered about secret fleets, powerful energy sources, and the possibility that humans had already prepared for events no one else could foresee. These rumors were amplified by the humans' calm demeanor and careful speech. Even when they were friendly, polite, and cooperative, their restraint was read as strategy, and every movement was scrutinized. Despite the rumors, humans remained focused on understanding rather than spectacle. They were learning how species thought, what motivated them, and where weaknesses might lie. They observed debates that lasted for hours and sometimes days, noting inconsistencies and patterns. When others tried to use complicated rhetoric to confuse or impress, humans asked straightforward questions that revealed clarity and simplicity behind complex arguments. This approach frustrated some, inspired others, and left many guessing at the humans' next move. The humans' influence grew quietly but steadily. Delegates began to realize that a single human question could shift the conversation in unexpected ways. One question might challenge assumptions, highlight risks, or reveal hidden biases. It was subtle, yet powerful. While humans did not make demands or assert authority, their presence changed the dynamics in the room. Discussions became more thoughtful. Arguments required more precision. Plans were reconsidered with care. Humanity's approach was not loud or aggressive, but it was effective in ways the galaxy had rarely experienced. Even among humans themselves, there was a quiet acknowledgement of what they were achieving. They spoke in low tones about observations, about what they had learned regarding different species' motivations, alliances, and weaknesses. They did not celebrate. They did not act out of pride. Their goal was understanding, not victory. They knew the galaxy was watching, and every decision they made would be analyzed and interpreted, but they refused to be distracted by perception. Instead, they focused on knowledge, insight, and preparation for the actions that would come later. As the second week of the summit progressed, the human delegation became a subject of fascination and anxiety. Observers reported that even the most experienced diplomats were having difficulty predicting human behavior. Humans did not conform to the usual models of negotiation, and their calm, deliberate approach was unsettling. Many began to understand that the humans' power did not lie in fleets, weapons, or overt influence, but in their clarity of thought, strategic patience, and unwillingness to be manipulated. The subtle power of humanity began to ripple beyond the summit chamber. Traders, explorers, and distant governments who monitored the proceedings noticed that humans were different. Their presence alone caused shifts in perception, trust, and caution. Alliances were reconsidered, and strategies were recalculated. Humans were quiet, but the galaxy felt their influence growing steadily. Every observer, every diplomat, every leader sensed that the humans were not just participants, they were a force that could not be predicted, ignored, or underestimated, even late at night. When the chambers emptied and most delegates rested, humans continued their quiet work. They reviewed notes, analyzed conversations, and discussed the subtle behaviors they had observed. They were patient, deliberate, and focused on the long term. They knew that in a galaxy driven by politics, conflict, and ego, restraint could be more powerful than aggression. Their calm presence had already caused speculation, tension, and admiration. By the end of Part 2, it was clear that humans had become a central yet enigmatic figure in the summit. They had not yet acted decisively or revealed their full intentions, but their methodical observation, precise questioning, and unwavering calm had shifted the perception of every species present. Where others expected chaos, manipulation, or performance, they found clarity, patience, and focus. Humans had begun to teach the galaxy a lesson without raising their voices, without drawing weapons, and without overt action. They had shown that power was not always demonstrated in displays, threats, or commands. It could exist quietly, through intelligence, awareness, and restraint. And as the summit moved forward, every delegate understood one undeniable truth. Humanity was unlike any other species the galaxy had ever encountered, and their next move could change everything. The summit had reached a critical point. The discussions had grown intense, and a proposal had been introduced that could change the course of the galaxy. It was ambitious, far-reaching, and designed to bring multiple civilizations under a single framework of trade, military cooperation, and shared governance. The leaders of many powerful species supported it enthusiastically. They saw it as a way to consolidate power, protect their interests, and ensure stability across star systems. Some saw it as a chance to gain dominance over rivals. Others saw opportunity for wealth and influence. The humans listened quietly, as they always did, observing the debate without immediately expressing an opinion. While other species engaged in heated arguments, trying to persuade, pressure, or intimidate one another, the humans remained calm. Their silence was deliberate. It was not indifference, nor was it hesitation. Humans were weighing the discussion, analyzing the proposal, and watching the reactions of others. Every movement, every word, every expression revealed insight about the species around them, their priorities, their weaknesses, their fears. Some delegates tried to involve the humans in the debate. They asked questions, sought human support, or attempted to pressure them into alignment. But the human delegation remained measured, polite, and neutral. They acknowledged points, asked clarifying questions, and listened carefully. They did not offer endorsements. They did not attack. They did not attempt to dominate the discussion. Their restraint was deliberate, and it made others uneasy. The proposal required a vote. Every species would need to commit their support, reject it, or abstain. Leaders assumed humanity would participate. They expected humans to have an opinion, to align with one faction or another, to tip the balance of power. They were wrong. When the time came, the humans did something no one had anticipated. They refused to vote. They simply withdrew from the chamber, leaving their seat empty. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Silence fell over the summit. Delegates stared in shock at the empty chairs where the humans had been seated. Murmurs rippled through the room as everyone tried to understand the gesture. Some assumed it was a protest. Others feared a hidden threat. A few even suspected that humanity had already made secret arrangements elsewhere, acting in ways beyond the Council's knowledge. The absence of humans created a vacuum that could not be ignored. The weight of their decision was felt by all present, and the proposal suddenly seemed less secure. Speculation exploded. Who were the humans to walk away? Why had they abandoned the Council at such a critical moment? What did their absence mean for the future of the galaxy? These questions swirled in every mind, yet no one could answer them with certainty. Humans had not left in anger or fear. They had not left to avoid responsibility. They had left because they would not participate on terms they did not choose. Their decision was deliberate, principled, and unmistakably human. Across the galaxy, news of the withdrawal spread quickly. Communications relays carried reports from the summit to distant systems, and the reactions were immediate and varied. Some civilizations expressed admiration for the humans' courage and independence. They marveled at a species that refused to be drawn into games of politics, that acted according to their own judgment rather than following expectations. Others reacted with alarm, worried that the absence of humanity would destabilize alliances, disrupt trade, and weaken the collective power of the Council. A few feared that humanity's refusal to participate could spark conflict or even war. The humans themselves returned to their own quarters. They did not celebrate their action, nor did they revel in the shock it had caused. Instead, they discussed quietly among themselves what they had observed. They analyzed the reactions of other species, noted patterns in behavior, and considered the long-term consequences of their choice. They knew that the galaxy would interpret their actions in many ways, but their focus remained on clarity, understanding, and preparation for what would come next. The withdrawal had immediate effects on the Council. Plans that had seemed certain became uncertain. Agreements that had appeared stable were now questioned. Delegates who had relied on human participation to justify their positions found themselves vulnerable. Even powerful species, confident in their dominance, realized that human absence disrupted the delicate balance of power. The Council had assumed that every major species would play by the rules, but humanity had refused to follow the expected script, and that refusal was reshaping the conversation in unpredictable ways. Observers outside the Council chambers noted another important effect. Humans had made their presence felt without taking aggressive action. They had not drawn weapons, threatened allies, or issued ultimatums. Yet the simple act of stepping away communicated strength, independence, and clarity of purpose. Other species began to understand that humanity's power was not in fleets or armies, but in their ability to act on principle, to choose their own path, and to demonstrate influence without submission. As the days passed, discussions about the humans' absence continued. Some species attempted to engage with humans informally, hoping to persuade them to return, or at least explain their decision. Humans listened and answered questions with patience, but they did not alter their stance. They were consistent, calm, and deliberate. Their reasoning was simple. They would not compromise their principles for political convenience. They would not participate in agreements that they did not fully understand or accept. This clarity of intention, combined with restraint, made the humans even more enigmatic and, in some ways, more powerful than if they had voted in favor or against the proposal. The withdrawal also revealed subtle tensions within the Council itself. Species that had relied on human support for influence suddenly found themselves uncertain. Negotiations that had seemed stable now faltered. Decisions that had appeared straightforward now required reconsideration. Even those who had opposed humans initially found themselves questioning whether the humans' absence might serve their own interests in unexpected ways. Humans had created disruption without confrontation, and the galaxy struggled to respond. Meanwhile, the humans continued their quiet observation. They analyzed the arguments presented, the body language of delegates, and the subtle alliances forming behind the scenes. They noted which species were flexible, which were rigid, which relied on intimidation, and which relied on cunning. Humans did not act rashly. They did not exploit weaknesses immediately. Their approach was patient, deliberate, and long-term. They understood that influence could be achieved not only through action, but also through restraint and perception. Stories of human behavior began to spread far beyond the Council. Traders, explorers, and diplomats who were not present at the summit heard reports of their withdrawal, and speculation grew. Some suggested that humans were preparing for an entirely different kind of strategy, one that would operate outside the Council's influence. Others imagined hidden technologies, secret fleets, or unspoken alliances. The humans' calm, deliberate actions created a ripple effect across the galaxy, inspiring curiosity, admiration, and fear in private meetings. Human delegates discussed not what they had taken away from the summit, but what they had learned. They focused on understanding motivations, observing patterns, and preparing for opportunities. Their absence from the council vote had been a statement, yes, but it was also a test. They had observed the reactions of the galaxy, measured the influence of their presence and absence, and gathered insights that would guide future decisions. They were not playing for immediate gain. They were shaping the long-term strategy of their species. Even as the summit continued without them, humans had already altered the course of the proceedings. Discussions became more cautious, negotiations more precise, and arguments more carefully considered. Delegates realized that even when humans were absent, their influence was present. The simple act of stepping away had changed perceptions, forced reconsideration, and shifted the balance of power. Humanity had demonstrated a new form of influence, one based not on participation, but on principle, observation, and deliberate action. By the end of Part 3, it was clear to everyone watching that humanity had done something remarkable. They had refused to conform, declined to participate in the expected process, and yet affected the galaxy more profoundly than many had anticipated. They had shown that strength was not always about dominance, alliances, or weapons. It could be about clarity, patience, and the courage to act according to one's principles. The humans had left an impression that would not fade. Across the summit chambers, across distant star systems, and even in private discussions among the most powerful leaders, the same thought echoed. Humanity was unlike any species the galaxy had known. They did not follow the expected rules, and they did not seek validation. They acted independently, deliberately, and with purpose. Their withdrawal from the vote was not a retreat, was a statement of principle, a demonstration of power, and the first visible step in a strategy that would reshape the galaxy in ways no one could yet predict. And even as the galaxy tried to interpret their actions, the humans continued quietly, deliberately, patiently. They were not concerned with applause or recognition. They were not concerned with fear or admiration. Their focus. The impact of humanity's absence from the summit began to spread across the galaxy like ripples on a still pond. News of their decision to step away from the vote traveled faster than most expected, carried by communication networks, diplomatic channels, and word of mouth. Traders, explorers, and even ordinary citizens in distant star systems were talking about the humans. They had done something unprecedented. They had refused to participate in a process that many considered essential to galactic order, and yet their decision was commanding attention everywhere. Some species reacted with admiration. They saw humans as courageous, independent, and principled. A few even quietly acknowledged that they might have acted the same way if they had possessed the same clarity and confidence. In distant worlds, philosophers and scholars debated the meaning of humanity's actions. What kind of species would prioritize principle over convenience, understanding over immediate gain, and observation over spectacle? These discussions spread from council chambers to universities and public forums across multiple star systems. The humans had become a symbol of deliberate, thoughtful independence. Others reacted with fear. Certain empires and coalitions worried that the humans' withdrawal would destabilize agreements, disrupt trade, and weaken long-standing alliances. The council itself struggled to maintain order as delegates, questioned how to proceed without the participation of a species whose influence was growing, even in absence. Some feared that humans had secret plans beyond the council's knowledge, that they were forming hidden alliances, or that they had already developed technologies far beyond public understanding. Speculation ran wild, and the uncertainty created tension that even the most experienced diplomats could not fully manage. Despite the galaxy-wide speculation, humans did not alter their behavior. They returned to their own systems, traveling in modest, well-organized fleets, avoiding any display of power that might attract unnecessary attention. Their goal was not intimidation or conquest. It was preparation. They focused on innovation, exploration, and understanding. Scientists worked tirelessly on advanced technologies. Engineers refined spacecraft designs, and diplomats observed the subtle movements of other species, noting patterns that might reveal their priorities and weaknesses. Humans began to form relationships outside the Council, but these relationships were based on mutual respect and trust rather than political obligation. Independent systems, small civilizations, and unaligned colonies found themselves drawn to humanity, not because they feared or admired them, but because humans treated them as equals. This approach stood in stark contrast to the usual galactic politics, where larger powers often sought control, exploitation, or dominance. Humans demonstrated that influence could grow quietly, without coercion, and that respect earned through fairness and principle could be stronger than power enforced through fear. Back at the Council, the absence of humans created gaps that others struggled to fill. Decisions that had been expected to pass easily were now uncertain. Alliances were tested as some species reconsidered their positions in the light of humanity's independence. Even proposals unrelated to humans were influenced by their absence, because every delegate knew that the humans' decision had demonstrated a new form of power, one that did not require participation in traditional politics to make an impact. Observers took note of the subtle ripple effects. Markets hesitated, trade agreements paused, and communication networks buzzed with speculation. Humanity's withdrawal had not caused chaos, but it had forced every species to rethink assumptions about influence, strategy, and negotiation. The simple act of stepping away had reshaped perceptions, and the galaxy could not ignore the fact that humans were now operating on a different level, one that was deliberate, calculated, and independent. Within human society, the response was quiet but intense. Leaders held councils not to debate whether the withdrawal had been wise. They already knew, but to consider the long-term consequences and opportunities. Scientists shared discoveries that could reshape travel, communication, and energy use. Engineers tested new designs that could make spacecraft faster, more efficient, and more adaptable. Strategists analyzed the movements of other species, noting which systems were most likely to align, resist, or exploit. Every action was deliberate, every decision considered carefully. Humans were preparing not for immediate confrontation, but for a future where they would operate according to their own principles, not those imposed by others. This period of preparation revealed another aspect of human strength: patience. While other species reacted impulsively to news, rumors, or perceived threats, humans remained calm. They understood the value of time, observation, and reflection. They did not act out of pride, fear, or ambition. Their focus was long-term, strategic, and rooted in understanding. While the galaxy speculated wildly about human intentions, humans quietly built capabilities that would allow them to act decisively when the moment was right. Some species attempted to reach out to humans during this time, seeking to persuade, negotiate, or even intimidate them into returning to the Council. Humans met these attempts with calm responses. They listened, asked questions, and sometimes declined invitations politely. They did not react with anger or defensiveness. Their clarity and composure made it difficult for others to manipulate or predict them. Every interaction reinforced the same lesson: humans could not be controlled or rushed. Influence came to them because of their competence and principle, not because of intimidation or negotiation tactics. Humans also began to explore new opportunities. For cooperation, that were not tied to the Council. They visited unaligned systems, shared knowledge, and formed partnerships based on mutual benefit. Unlike the formalized, hierarchical agreements of the Council, these relationships were voluntary, flexible, and focused on practical results. These efforts allowed humans to gain allies, build networks, and establish influence without ever compromising their independence. Over time, these smaller alliances grew into a subtle, quiet web of influence that others began to notice with a mix of curiosity and concern. Across the galaxy, the perception of humans began to change. They were no longer seen as merely participants in the Council or as one of many rising species. Instead, they became something else entirely, a model of independence, competence, and strategic restraint. Observers realized that humans could wield influence not by dominating discussions, controlling resources, or threatening others, but simply by acting consistently, intelligently, and with principle. Even those who had once doubted humanity began to recognize the subtle power they wielded. The withdrawal had another unexpected effect. It forced other species to consider their own priorities more carefully. Humans had demonstrated that strength and influence did not always come from domination, intimidation, or spectacle. By refusing to participate in the Council's processes, humans had created space for reflection, forcing others to think about why they acted the way they did, what truly mattered, and how they could maintain relevance in a galaxy where participation was not always necessary for power. As months passed, humanity's quiet work began to bear fruit. Their scientists developed innovations that improved communication across light years. Their engineers perfected ships capable of long-range exploration and rapid travel. Their diplomats learned to navigate complex interstellar relationships without reliance on force or formal authority. Each step reinforced the lesson that humanity's strength came not from traditional displays of power, but from competence, preparation, and integrity. Even within the Council, humans' absence became a point of reflection. Leaders who had once dismissed them as minor players began to acknowledge their impact. The empty chairs at the summit were not a sign of weakness. They were a reminder that humans operated differently. They had shown that influence could be quiet, deliberate, and long-lasting. The galaxy was forced to respect them, even as they continued to act independently of the Council's authority. By the end of this period, the galaxy had changed, subtly but irreversibly. Humans had refused to play by the rules, and in doing so, they had created a new model of Power One based on principle, observation, and patient preparation. Others could speculate, fear, or admire, but they could not ignore humanity's growing presence. Even without fleets dominating the skies or proclamations echoing across systems, humans had reshaped perceptions, alliances, and strategies throughout the galaxy. Humans themselves continued quietly, deliberately, and with unwavering focus. They had made a decision to step away from the Council, not out of fear, anger, or pride, but because they understood the importance of independence. They knew that influence was not always about presence, participation, or visibility. Sometimes it came from restraint, clarity, and the courage to act on one's own terms. They had shown the galaxy that power could exist quietly, without spectacle, and that absence could speak as loudly as presence. And as the galaxy adjusted to this new reality, humans continued to prepare for the future. Their work, their innovations, and their deliberate strategies were building a foundation that would allow them to act when the time was right. They had refused to play by the rules of the Council, and in doing so, they had begun to shape a galaxy that was more aware. Months passed since humanity's withdrawal from the Council, yet the effects of their decision continued to grow across the galaxy. Where once there had been speculation and fear, now there was a subtle, almost quiet acknowledgement of the humans' growing influence. Despite being absent from the formal channels of power, humans had begun to demonstrate a kind of strength that others could neither easily measure nor challenge. Their approach was not flashy or aggressive, yet it had consequences that touched systems far beyond their own. Back on their home planets, humans continued to focus on development and innovation. Their scientists worked on breakthroughs that could change the understanding of energy, propulsion, and communication. They experimented with new technologies that allowed faster-than-light travel, more efficient resource management, and safer colonization of distant worlds. Their engineers refined ships that could survive extreme environments, travel vast distances without refueling, and respond to challenges with remarkable speed and adaptability. Every innovation was carefully designed, tested, and refined, not for show, but for practical impact. At the same time, human diplomats traveled quietly to systems that had previously been ignored or considered minor by the larger empires. They built relationships not through coercion or hierarchy, but through cooperation and mutual respect. They shared knowledge, provided assistance, and listened to the concerns of these systems. In doing so, they created networks of allies who were loyal not out of fear or obligation, but because humans had shown they could be trusted. These relationships strengthened humanity's influence quietly, outside the traditional structures of the Council, and no one could contest their growing power without acknowledging the goodwill and competence humans had cultivated. As humans strengthened their networks, the galaxy continued to notice. Even species that had initially dismissed humanity as a minor player began to reconsider. Analysts reported that human fleets were organized efficiently, that their technology was advancing quickly, and that their systems operated in ways that were more resilient than most others could manage. While humans had not returned to the Council, their actions had shown that absence did not mean weakness. On the contrary, their restraint and independence had created a new kind of leverage, one that depended not on intimidation, but on competence and principle. Across the Council, species began to reassess their strategies. Some sought to engage with humanity directly, hoping to gain favor or understand their intentions. Others tried to anticipate the humans' next moves, analyzing every message, trade, and interaction for hidden meaning. Even those who had opposed humans initially began to acknowledge a subtle truth. The humans had achieved influence without engaging in the traditional games of diplomacy. Their withdrawal had been a test, a quiet demonstration of the strength that comes from independence, observation, and preparation. Meanwhile, humans continued to explore, expand, and innovate. Scientists mapped unexplored regions of space, discovered resources that could transform energy systems, and experimented with new methods of communication that allowed for instant coordination across vast distances. Engineers tested spacecraft capable of long-term exploration with minimal support, while diplomats traveled to independent systems to negotiate alliances based on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. Every action was carefully considered, deliberate, and aligned with a vision of long-term independence and resilience. The influence of humans began to spread in ways that were difficult to quantify. Traders found it easier to engage with human-controlled systems because humans valued fairness, transparency, and reliability. Independent colonies and smaller civilizations began to adopt human innovations, seeing practical advantages in following human guidance. Even the largest empires, which had once relied on force and intimidation, realized that humans were creating networks of cooperation and influence that were becoming impossible to ignore. Humanity was shaping the galaxy not through aggression or domination, but through competence, principle, and deliberate action. At the same time, humans observed the galaxy carefully. They studied patterns of behavior, alliances, conflicts, and negotiations. They noted which species were flexible and adaptable, which were rigid and resistant to change, and which relied on fear or manipulation to maintain control. This observation was not idle. It informed every decision humans made. They were patient, knowing that influence grows slowly and that understanding the motivations and weaknesses of others is more valuable than immediate action. Their restraint and long-term thinking had already created respect and caution among the galaxy's most powerful species. Some species attempted to test humanity. They tried to provoke reactions, offer false information, or manipulate events to see how humans would respond. Each time, humans remained composed. They asked questions, verified facts, and responded with clarity and precision. They did not act impulsively, and they did not allow themselves to be drawn into traps or distractions. Their calm and deliberate approach only strengthened the perception that humans were capable, intelligent, and independent. Those who tried to manipulate them often ended up revealing their own weaknesses instead. Humans' approach had another effect. It inspired others. Some smaller civilizations began to emulate human strategies, adopting patience, principle, and careful observation as their own tools for survival and influence. Scholars wrote about human methods, strategists studied their actions, and ordinary citizens admired the clarity and fairness that humans demonstrated. The influence of humanity was no longer limited to the systems they directly controlled. It was spreading as a model for how independence and competence could coexist. Even among human leadership, there was a quiet acknowledgement of progress. They recognized that influence could be achieved without direct confrontation, without intimidation, and without force. They understood that the decisions they made, now careful, deliberate, principle-based decisions, would lay the foundation for a future in which humanity could act with confidence, integrity, and authority. They were not seeking immediate recognition or reward. Their focus was long-term, strategic, and centered on building a foundation that would endure for generations. Meanwhile, the galaxy continued to adjust. Trade routes adapted to human-controlled systems. Independent colonies aligned voluntarily with human initiatives, and even major empires found themselves reconsidering their strategies. The absence of humanity from the Council had forced every species to rethink what influence truly meant. Power was no longer just about presence, domination, or alliances. It could also exist quietly, deliberately, and through consistent principle. Humans had demonstrated a new model of strength, and the galaxy was beginning to take notice as human networks grew. Their technological advancements continued to surprise observers. Communication systems allowed for coordination across vast distances. Propulsion systems enabled faster and more efficient travel, and energy technologies improved the sustainability of colonies and fleets. Each innovation reinforced the idea that humans could achieve remarkable results without relying on intimidation or formal authority. Their approach combined intelligence, patience, and practicality in a way that few could replicate. Humans also continued to explore the philosophical and ethical dimensions of their actions. They debated how best to maintain independence while still interacting with other species. They considered how to balance growth, exploration, and influence without succumbing to greed, fear, or corruption. Their decisions were guided not just by strategy, but by principle. This human-centered approach created an example for others, demonstrating that influence and ethics could coexist, and that long-term success depended on integrity as much as on power. Even as humans worked quietly, the galaxy continued to speculate. Observers debated whether humanity would return to the Council, whether they would intervene in conflicts, or whether they were preparing for some larger action. These speculations reflected the fact that humans had become a presence that could not be ignored. Even when absent from formal proceedings, their influence was being felt, studied, and respected. By the end of this period, it was clear that humanity had achieved something remarkable. They had withdrawn from traditional channels of power, refused to participate in expected political games, and yet had increased their influence across the galaxy. They had shown that strength does not always come from domination, intimidation, or spectacle. It can come from clarity, principle, competence, and patient observation. The humans' absence had created a ripple effect, and their quiet work had begun to shape the galaxy in ways that were subtle, profound, and lasting. Humans continued to act deliberately, patiently, and with integrity. They did not seek attention, validation, or recognition. They focused on learning, building, and preparing. They had shown that power could exist quietly, that independence could create influence, and that careful, principle-based action could reshape perceptions and alliances. The galaxy had begun to understand that humanity was not simply another species. It was a new kind of presence, one that could not be predicted, ignored, or dismissed. And so, as systems across the galaxy adjusted, strategists recalculated, and civilizations observed, humanity quietly expanded its capabilities. Time passed, and the galaxy continued to shift in response to humanity's choices. Where once species had assumed that influence was defined by fleets or formal agreements, they now saw something different. Humans had shown that power could be quiet, deliberate, and principled, and the ripple effects of their actions were spreading farther than most had imagined. Every system that interacted with humanity began to adapt, not because they were forced to, but because humans had demonstrated competence, fairness, and independence in a way that inspired trust. The human fleets moved with purpose, not display. Ships glided through space efficiently, maintaining contact between colonies, supply lines, and exploration vessels. Every journey was calculated, every mission planned, yet no step was wasteful. Humans had learned that effectiveness was often more influential than size or strength. Observers from other civilizations noted how humans managed resources carefully, coordinated complex tasks across light years, and maintained discipline without overt authority. These qualities made humans appear even more capable, more adaptable, and in some ways, more formidable than those who relied on intimidation or sheer numbers. Human colonies flourished under this quiet guidance. They were built with thoughtfulness and practicality. Infrastructure was durable, self-sustaining, and designed to grow with the population. Communities were organized around principles of cooperation, fairness, and shared responsibility. Humans treated one another and those they interacted with respectfully, earning loyalty not through force, but through example. It was a model that seemed simple at first glance, yet its effectiveness became increasingly clear across every system that experienced it. Meanwhile, humans maintained their networks beyond the Council. They visited independent worlds, offered assistance to systems in need, and shared technological and logistical knowledge. These partnerships were voluntary, not political. No treaties were imposed. No obligations demanded. Civilizations that chose to work with humans did so out of mutual respect and a recognition that humans operated with clarity, competence, and reliability. Slowly, these connections formed an invisible web of influence that extended farther than any formal council resolution could. Other species continued to watch, analyze, and speculate. Some attempted to test humans, sending envoys with hidden agendas or presenting misleading information to see if they could provoke reactions. Each time, humans responded with calm, precise reasoning. They asked clear questions, verified facts carefully, and refused to be drawn into manipulative schemes. Their patience frustrated those who relied on shortcuts, cunning, or intimidation to achieve results. Humans did not need to dominate. Their effectiveness came from competence, observation, and principle. Even at the Council, humans' absence remained significant. Proposals that had once seemed straightforward were now reconsidered. Delegates who had previously relied on human votes found themselves reevaluating positions. The empty chairs where humans had sat were a reminder that influence could exist without presence, and that a species willing to act according to principle could shape decisions indirectly. Discussions became more cautious, arguments more precise, and strategies more considered. Humanity had shifted the very structure of negotiation without entering the chamber. Within human leadership, there was a quiet understanding of their growing responsibility. They were aware that their actions carried weight far beyond immediate interactions. Every exploration, every alliance, every technological innovation contributed not only to their own growth, but to the perception of humanity across the galaxy. Leaders and strategists emphasized careful planning, foresight, and patience. They knew that influence was strongest when it was principled, deliberate, and prepared, and they dedicated themselves to building systems and networks that could endure long into the future. Humans also began to address the philosophical dimensions of their rise. They debated how to maintain independence while engaging with others, how to share knowledge without exploitation, and how to act ethically in a galaxy driven by power struggles and survival instincts. These discussions guided policy, technology, and exploration alike. Decisions were not made for short-term gain. They were made with a long view, considering generations to come. This careful, thoughtful approach became one of humanity's most distinguishing traits. Beyond practical actions, humanity's example began to inspire others. Scholars in distant systems studied their methods, strategists noted their principles, and citizens admired their balance of independence, fairness, and foresight. Slowly, a philosophy of deliberate, principled influence began to spread. Other species began to experiment with similar approaches, realizing that power could be wielded without domination, that respect could replace fear, and that careful observation could be more impactful than aggressive action. Humanity had become a model, not by proclamation, but through consistent example. As time went on, humans made subtle yet significant interventions across the galaxy. In regions plagued by conflict or mismanagement, humans provided guidance, shared technological solutions, or facilitated communication between opposing parties. They did not impose decisions. They did not take sides unnecessarily. Instead, they acted where clarity, fairness, and reason could improve outcomes. Each successful effort reinforced the perception that humans were competent, principled, and capable of influencing the galaxy without relying on force. Even major empires began to adjust. They could no longer assume that humans would be swayed by traditional diplomacy, intimidation, or alliances. They had learned that humans acted according to principle, not pressure. This created a subtle but profound shift in strategy. Where once negotiations depended on threats, favors, or displays of power, now there was a need for clarity, integrity, and honesty. Humanity's influence was quiet, but transformative, reshaping expectations for how civilizations interacted. Humans also continued their technological development at an impressive pace. Their communication systems allowed instant coordination over vast distances, ensuring that decisions could be implemented efficiently and effectively. Their propulsion technologies enabled rapid travel and flexible exploration, while their energy systems became more sustainable and reliable. Every advancement reinforced the same lesson. Humans did not need spectacle or aggression to be powerful. Their competence, preparation, and principled approach were enough to make them a dominant force. Even without the formal trappings of authority. In private councils, humans reviewed their strategies carefully. They considered potential challenges, opportunities for alliances, and emerging threats. They discussed philosophical principles alongside tactical considerations, ensuring that their growth remained consistent with their values. This combination of practical and ethical deliberation became a hallmark of human leadership. It created stability, resilience, and trust, both internally and externally. Humans were not merely expanding their influence. They were setting a standard for how power could be exercised responsibly. Across the galaxy, the perception of humans continued to evolve. They were no longer seen simply as participants in the council, or as a rising power. They had become a benchmark for competence, principle, and independent action. Other species began to measure their own strategies against human behavior, seeking to emulate aspects of their deliberate, long-term approach. The influence of humanity had grown quietly but irreversibly. They had shaped perception, alliances, and expectations without confrontation, spectacle, or domination. Even in areas far from human systems, observers noticed the effects. Trade networks adjusted, independent colonies adopted human technologies, and leaders reconsidered strategies in light of the new model of influence humanity had demonstrated. Where once humans had been underestimated, they were now recognized as a force that could not be ignored. Their power was subtle, rooted in principle, competence, and observation. But it was undeniable that, by the end of this period, it was clear that humanity had achieved something extraordinary. They had withdrawn from traditional channels of power, refused to participate in expected political games, and yet had increased their influence across the galaxy. They had demonstrated that strength could exist quietly, that independence could create impact, and that deliberate, principled action could reshape perceptions, alliances, and strategies. Humans had achieved a level of influence and respect that few could challenge, not through aggression or spectacle, but through intelligence, patience, and integrity. Humanity continued to act deliberately, consistently, and ethically. They expanded their networks, developed new technologies, and explored unknown regions of space. They built systems, communities, and partnerships based on principle and competence. Their absence from the council, once a cause of shock, had become a symbol of independent power. Across the galaxy, the truth was slowly understood. Humans did not need to dominate, manipulate, or coerce to shape outcomes. Their deliberate, principle-based approach allowed them to influence events and systems more profoundly than many of the most powerful civilizations had imagined. And so, humanity's presence quiet, deliberate, and principled continued to grow. They had changed the galaxy without ever raising weapons, issuing ultimatums, or engaging in spectacle. They had shown that